Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning in to tonight's episode. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's get started. It's unsettling how quickly you adapt to the sight of dark stains on tile floors. One moment, you're trying not to look at them. The next, you're stepping around them like it's normal. This place used to be a police station. Now it's a tomb with flickering lights and shattered glass. The silence broken only by distant, desperate calls for help. I drift through corridors filled with abandoned desks and broken lockers. A stranger in a place that was once all about law and order. Strange that I feel safer here than out on the streets, with those things sprinting around every corner. A day ago, maybe two, time's hard to track, I was something else entirely. Kevin Moreno, locked up for an attempted robbery at Seraphine Diamonds. Small-time thief, they called me. Though the job I pulled was anything but small. I was caught, dragged in here, slapped with enough charges to sink me for good. If you'd asked me then, I would have said I was having the worst night of my life. Turns out, I was wrong. Being cuffed to a steel table while the world collapsed outside wasn't the worst. It was just the start. The real horror came after, when the infected rushed in and every plan, mine, theirs, anybody's, shattered. So, I suppose I should back up. Because if you've only known me as the thief who got lucky, you'd never understand what it's like to stand in these halls, picking through the pockets of people who'll never wake up, wondering if their radio still works, wondering if there's a way out. Let me tell you how I got here. That evening started like any other big job. I'd spent a few weeks casing the place. I knew which alarms were tied directly to the Chicago Police Department and which were on private security circuits. I knew the staff schedules, the best time to slip in unnoticed, even which guard was likely to doze off in the back room. It was a well-planned job, at least by my standards. My contact for the getaway, a guy named Leon, was parked 2 blocks down, waiting to whisk me away the second I exited the store with a bag full of diamonds. I had big plans for those diamonds, paying off some old debts, investing in a small garage in Cicero, and maybe trying my luck at a half-legitimate life for once. But luck failed me that night. It all went sideways when a silent alarm I'd missed triggered about 5 minutes after I entered. The Chicago PD arrived so fast that I barely had time to stash the goods in the duffel before flashlights cut through the front windows. I remember the swirl of red and blue light painting the inside walls, and in a moment of panic, I made a break for the rear exit. Didn't get far. An officer tackled me before I reached the door. I had a set of lockpicks in my belt, a side cutter, and a loaded revolver hidden in an inner pocket. I never got the chance to draw. In seconds, I was in cuffs, face down on the ground, surrounded by a half-dozen cops barking orders to stay still. I spent the next hour or so on a hard bench at the district station, which sits not too far from the Chicago Loop. They took me in an unmarked cruiser to the 1st District Precinct on South State Street. Under normal circumstances, it would be a busy place, especially on a Friday night. People brought in for petty thefts, loitering, the usual ruckus that Chicago nights can produce. You'd see a handful of officers working the desks, a few squad cars out front. The place always had a certain rhythm, the occasional clink of a cell door, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead, the static from police radios. But something about that night felt off. Maybe it was the sky, dyed an unusual purple-orange hue at dusk, or maybe the quiet urgency I sensed among the officers. It was like they were waiting for something more substantial to happen. Little did we know, it already had. I was scheduled for an interrogation later that evening. They wanted to pin not just the jewelry store job on me, but a handful of unsolved burglaries they suspected I was involved in. My track record was messy enough, so they probably figured they could throw me in a hole for a long time. I remember sitting in a small side office while an older detective named Ian Church, silver hair, sharp eyes, peppered me with questions about where I'd stashed the diamonds. He had a calm, methodical presence that suggested he'd been in this line of work far longer than most. His tone never rose, never fell. It was as if he knew exactly which facts he needed and had all night to get them out of me. I admit I cracked wise a couple of times. That's my style. Mask any nerves with sarcastic remarks. But Detective Church wasn't having it, and I doubt I'd have walked free under normal circumstances. Fate, however, had a different plan. Midway through the interrogation, the phone in the hallway started ringing incessantly. At first, Church ignored it. Then a younger officer stuck his head through the door, a wild, disbelieving look on his face. He didn't say much. Something about emergency calls flooding in, people acting out of control in the west side, random attacks near Navy Pier, possible cases of severe rabies. Church told me to stay put. He left me cuffed to a metal ring on the interrogation table and stepped into the hallway. Through the small rectangular window in the door, I watched the station spring to life. Officers rushed by in a flurry, some pulling on tactical vests, others grabbing riot shields, some hurriedly speaking into walkie-talkies. A few minutes later, an alarm went off. Some internal system I wasn't familiar with. It wasn't the standard siren you'd expect. It was more of an insistent beep-beep that set everyone on edge, as though calling them to immediate action. Before long, the place started emptying out. The 911 calls must have been catastrophic, because I heard words like full mobilization and all units on deck. The station was hemorrhaging officers. Between the city's north and south ends, from the lakeshore to the suburbs, people were apparently losing their minds, biting, lashing out violently. Those left behind in the station were either too junior to be sent into the field or assigned to keep an eye on the detainees. I saw them setting up perimeters near the front and side doors, as if expecting trouble to follow them straight into the precinct. I sat there at that table for a long time. Could have been an hour. Could have been more. The overhead fluorescent lights buzzed. Occasionally, a flicker of static came through the speaker of the radio left in the corner. Words like containment and infected made their way through the static. Despite the weird tension, it still felt safer in that locked station than anywhere else in the city. My biggest concern was how many charges they'd pin on me. Then, in the corridor, a commotion. I couldn't see much from my vantage point, but I heard frantic shouting. Another phone ringing off the hook. The sound of something metallic rolling across the floor. Maybe an equipment cart knocked over. Then silence. Deafening, all-encompassing silence. My mind raced. I wondered if maybe those rabies cases had turned up at the station, or if some angry detainee had started a fight. Eventually, a muffled scream tore through the hush, followed by curses and cries for help. A door slammed. More screams. Then I heard footsteps pounding along the corridor, frantic and stumbling. Another scream, cut short. If my ankles had been free, I might have kicked my way out of that table ring just to see what was happening, but I was secured pretty tight. I started scanning the room for anything I could use to loosen the handcuffs. That's when I remembered the small metal pick I'd stashed in a hidden slot in my belt. The officers must have overlooked it during their search, or maybe they just missed it in their hurry. Either way, it was the best news I'd had all night. With enough contorting, I managed to tug the belt around so that the hidden seam faced me. Then, pulling my wrists up as far as the cuffs would allow, I slipped my fingers along the belt's underside until I felt the thin metallic shape. I got to work on the cuffs. It wasn't the first time I'd had to pick my way out of handcuffs, but it wasn't easy either, especially not while tethered to a ring bolted to the table. My arms felt twisted, my posture was awkward, and every time I thought I'd almost made progress, I could hear something else happening out in the hallway. More crashes, more disturbing thuds. At one point the overhead lights flickered, and for half a second, I worried the power might go out. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, the latch gave. A quiet click. I was free. I took a moment to stand, to see if I could peer through the small window. Bodies moved beyond it, though in the flickering fluorescent glow, I couldn't be sure which of them were officers or fellow detainees or something else. The screams outside had turned to a series of wet sounds and gurgling moans, interspersed with occasional bursts of gunfire. Someone was either defending themselves or had lost it entirely. My heart might have been hammering, but I refused to think about that. Fear or no fear, I had to keep moving. I tiptoed to the door. The handle turned easily, no key required from my side. As I nudged it open, the smell hit me. It was overpowering, as though a rancid odor of copper and rotting garbage had taken hold of the air. It curled around me the instant the door cracked open, making me recoil. My eyes watered and my throat tightened, urging me to pull back, but I pressed on. The corridor lay in partial darkness, the overhead lights flickering in a pattern that cast ominous shadows against the walls. Shapes littered the floor. I stepped out carefully, trying not to think about what these shapes were, though it was obvious from the glimpses of uniforms and civilian clothing. Right near the door, I spotted an officer's body. I'd never learned his name, only glimpsed his face earlier while they booked me. The expression now was frozen in a terrible surprise, his eyes wide and glassy. There were marks on his uniform that looked like vicious tears. I glanced away, doing my best to focus on staying alive. Down the hall, another figure sprawled face down, motionless. Then a distant crash from somewhere deeper in the station. It sounded as if metal lockers had been knocked over. I heard a rasping shuffle that made my skin crawl, accompanied by whimpering that cut off with sudden finality. In any normal scenario, I would have looked for a weapon. I didn't want to check the bodies, but it didn't take me long to spot a holster on the ground nearby, next to the officer. The firearm was a Glock 19. I'd handled guns before, occupational hazard in my line of work, so I slid it out carefully. The magazine was full, a bullet already chambered. I set the safety and held it close, trying not to let the reality of the situation engulf me. I kept moving. The station layout was fairly standard: a main lobby up front, a corridor leading to offices and an interrogation wing, and beyond that, a detention block for holding cells. Another hallway branched off to the staff lockers and evidence room. I decided I'd try for the main lobby. Maybe I'd find an exit. If not, I'd keep searching. Every step I took was deliberate, eyes scanning for any sign of movement. The radio chatter had died out to static. Phones continued to ring, but no one answered them. Occasionally, a digital beep from some unattended desk drifted through the emptiness. I came upon a small cluster of cell blocks. The bars were open in one cell, locked in another. I heard a faint shuffling inside that locked cell, but I didn't try to investigate. I couldn't handle the idea of seeing what was behind those bars. Instead, I slipped past and made my way toward the front desk. The entire time, a chorus of distant sounds haunted me. Thumps, scraping, and every so often, quick bursts of footsteps that set me on high alert. I reached the door leading to the lobby. It had a small window, but something blocked most of my view. Slowly, I pressed forward, cracking it open. The scene inside forced me to freeze. Bodies lay scattered across the lobby floor. Some wore the dark blue of the Chicago PD. Others wore street clothes. A large reception desk sat overturned near the center. The glass doors leading to the outside world were shattered, big shards jutting from the frame. A few of those things wandered around. Their movements were abrupt, as though every muscle spasmed with uncontrollable tension. They were fast, faster than any unsteady, shuffling creature I'd ever imagined from old horror movies. Right then, one of them pivoted. Its clothes hung in tatters, and I noticed an officer's uniform shirt, but the chest and sleeves were ripped beyond recognition. The face looked contorted with fury. Dried stains streaked along the jaws. As soon as it spotted me, it let out a rasping hiss and sprinted forward with shocking speed. I barely had time to bring up the Glock before it closed the distance. My aim was shaky, but I squeezed the trigger. Muzzle flash lit the gloom. The figure fell, slamming into the reception desk behind it. Something primal in me wanted to recoil, but I kept my mind fixed on the immediate danger. Two more figures jerked their heads my way, then lunged. Their speed was terrifying. No hesitant steps, no slow wander. It was a full-blown sprint. This time I fired repeatedly. The blasts rang out in the open space, echoing off the walls. The shapes collapsed in mid-stride, and for a moment, the lobby returned to a dreadful stillness, save for the flicker of overhead lights. My next move was to check the path to the shattered doors. I could see the street outside. Chicago's city lights illuminated the night, but the scene looked surreal. A few cars stood abandoned in the middle of the road, some with their doors open, lights still on. In the distance, I caught sight of more frantic movement. Figures darting between parked vehicles, the faint wail of sirens drifting from multiple directions. The city was under siege. I needed to leave, but the open street didn't look any safer than the station. Still, staying put was not an option. I noticed a police cruiser angled near the station steps, its engine still running, the driver's side door ajar. That was my chance. If I could get there, I might be able to drive away. I threw a glance over my shoulder, then sprinted through the shattered glass doors into the night. The air outside clung to me, thick with tension. My shoes crunched over broken glass, and I kept the Glock raised, scanning left and right. The cruiser was just a few steps away. Inside, the radio crackled with faint voices. The headlights cut wide arcs across the empty street. I slid into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and locked it. The console glowed with the vehicle's electronics. I dropped the Glock into my lap and ran my hands along the steering column, searching for the shift. These things were standard-issue Fords, decked out with lights and sirens. I'd hot-wired enough cars in my time to feel comfortable with a standard ignition, but this cruiser was already on, so I just put it in gear. The wheel felt stiff beneath my grip as I eased into the street, weaving around the abandoned cars. I resisted the urge to floor it. The last thing I wanted was to attract more attention than necessary. For the next few blocks, Chicago looked like it was teetering on the edge of madness. Some storefronts had windows smashed in. A bus was stalled in the middle of an intersection, hazard lights flashing. Figures ran in every direction, some screaming for help, others lurching with that terrifying, erratic speed. I saw one policeman in the distance, firing a shotgun at someone dashing toward him. The muzzle flashes lit the block, but I kept driving. My priorities had shifted to survival. The old me might have tried to slip away quietly from the scene, but now all my street smarts were telling me to find a place to lay low, gather supplies, and plan my next move. I took a left toward Michigan Avenue. Part of me thought about the jewelry store I'd tried to rob, as if it could somehow offer refuge. That was foolish. There'd be no safety in there. Instead, I headed west, passing near the looming Willis Tower. The roads were sporadically blocked by accidents, so I had to maneuver around them, constantly scanning for the infected. That's what I started calling them in my head. The infected. Rabies, virus, parasite, I didn't know, and it didn't matter at that moment. I tried to tune into the police radio. Most channels were a mess of overlapping voices, frantic updates about civilians attacking paramedics, multiple officers down, and pleas for backup that never arrived. Some official-sounding transmissions tried to set up quarantine zones along the outskirts of the city, urging officers to direct civilians to those zones. But from the chaos I was seeing, that plan was already in tatters. I had to think rationally. Where would I go? Hospitals would be overrun. Police stations, ironically, looked to be the first to fall. If I aimed for the suburbs, would I find relative safety, or just a horde of infected? Maybe I could hole up in some secure building, a warehouse, a storage facility. My mind drifted back to an old contact I had, a guy named Dustin who once offered me a place to hide if I ever ran into trouble with the law. He lived in a small apartment complex in Brookfield, near the zoo. I doubted he'd appreciate a surprise visit, but times had changed. I decided it was worth a shot. I pressed on, weaving through the city's labyrinthine streets. Occasionally, the headlights revealed horrifying scenes. A battered city bus with half its windows smashed, movement inside that suggested a struggle. A once busy diner where only silhouettes remained, slumped in booths or crawling on the tile floor. Flickering streetlights that cast frantic shapes onto the pavement. Each new block felt more claustrophobic, even though I was driving through open streets. Then came a frantic pounding on the cruiser's passenger side window. I almost swerved into a mailbox. When I glanced over, I saw a young woman in tattered clothing, eyes wide with desperation, gesturing for me to let her in. Behind her, a figure sprinted with a wild gait. She screamed something I couldn't make out. Without thinking, I reached across, popped the lock, and let her in. The second she closed the door, I stomped the accelerator. The figure behind her lunged and slammed into the side, smearing something across the glass, but we peeled away. She pressed her hands against the dashboard, gasping for breath. She wore a name tag from some store in the Loop. Mei Lin, it said. She had cuts along her arms, though they looked more like scrapes from broken glass than bites. I kept the gun in my lap, uncertain whether to trust her fully, but she didn't seem infected or threatening. She did have a haunted 1,000-yard stare. After a moment, she asked me in a ragged voice if I was a cop. I quickly explained, "No, I'm not. Found the cruiser, that's all." She nodded as though it didn't much matter. "What's going on?" she whispered. "I wish I knew," I answered. "People going crazy. Some infection maybe. The cops are scattered. I'm heading west, trying to find a safe spot." Mei Lin pressed her forehead to the window, staring at the wreckage outside as we rolled past. "It's everywhere," she said. I was working a night shift when the calls came in. Some folks on the street started attacking passers-by. Customers rushed out to see. Then all the windows smashed. I ran. We didn't talk much after that. We both knew survival was the only priority. She spotted my Glock but didn't flinch. Maybe she found it reassuring, or maybe she just didn't care. Sometimes chaos erases the usual boundaries of fear. We managed to navigate toward the outskirts. The roads became less congested. The houses and storefronts thinned out. It was night, but the city never truly sleeps, so lights still shimmered in random pockets, though some areas were plunged into darkness. During a quick lull, I pulled over in a dimly lit spot to reassess. The cruiser's gas tank was about half full. I looked around, hoping to find a better vehicle, but everything else had been abandoned or was too damaged to be reliable. I tried the radio again. This time, I caught a broadcast from the Illinois National Guard. The voice crackled, instructing any remaining law enforcement units to direct civilians to designated evacuation sites. There was a mention of a site near the United Center and another farther south, but it sounded like the plan was uncoordinated at best. I glanced at Mei Lin. We both understood how risky it would be to drive to a location where thousands of panicked individuals might be converging. If a few infected got in, that entire site would turn into a feeding ground. We decided to keep moving toward Brookfield. As we drove, we shared what little we had learned. She told me she'd seen how the infected attacked, like cornered animals, but with even more ferocity. They moved quickly, without apparent regard for pain or self-preservation. In some cases, one bite was enough to doom a person if they couldn't stop the bleeding or get away. I recalled the dispatch talk about rabies, but this seemed far too aggressive and widespread for any normal strain. Along the way, we skirted around the city. I avoided major highways, worried they might be jammed or under heavy government control. We passed through neighborhoods where lights still glowed in some windows, but I never stopped. The deeper we went, the quieter it got, but the tension didn't ease. Every so often a shape darted across an intersection, and I'd press the accelerator. Eventually, I pulled onto a smaller road lined with trees. Brookfield was close. I recognized some of the side streets and local businesses. An old bakery closed for the night. A small grocery store with bars on the windows. During normal times, it felt like a peaceful suburban area. Now, a creeping unease draped every corner. Dustin's place was in a 3-story apartment building near some older single-family homes. I parked a block away, behind a row of hedges. The engine's idle seemed loud in the hush of night. I looked at Mei Lin. She gave a small nod, ready to follow. My plan was simple. Get inside quickly, find Dustin, and stay put until we could figure out our next move. The building's front entrance was locked, but my years of picking locks came to the rescue again. It took me only a few seconds to slip the pick in and manipulate the pins. Mei Lin kept watch. Once inside, the hallway lights flickered uncertainly. We headed up 2 flights of stairs, guns drawn. Well, my gun, her shaky hands gripping a baton she'd found in the cruiser's trunk. The hallway was empty. I reached Dustin's door, my knuckles rapped softly. No response. I tried the knob, found it locked. Another quick pick job, and I was in. The apartment was dark and musty, like someone had left in a hurry without powering off the AC or closing the windows. A half-eaten sandwich sat on the counter, half wrapped in greasy parchment paper from a local deli. No Dustin. But the place showed no sign of forced entry, no blood, no sign of a scuffle. It just looked abandoned. For a moment I considered the possibility that Dustin had gotten wind of the outbreak and made a break for some safer location. Or maybe he was out scavenging. Mei Lin closed the door quietly behind us. She noticed the blinking light of a laptop on a small dining table. The screen displayed a half-typed message in an email window. Going south to... That was it. He must have left in a rush, trying to warn someone or ask for help. Now the cursor blinked in a mocking emptiness. With little other choice, we holed up there for the night. I found some canned goods in Dustin's cupboards. Soup, beans. Not much, but enough to get by for a while. The water still ran, albeit with a sputtering in the pipes, so we filled empty containers in case the supply shut off later. We tried not to make noise. My mind was reeling, sorting through all the images I'd seen in the last few hours. It was an endless reel of chaos, looping over and over. I could sense that same unrest in Mei Lin, though we didn't talk about it much. We both recognized it was a new world out there. I wish I could say we found the next morning more hopeful, but the first light only revealed more horrors. From the apartment's windows, we saw groups of infected sprinting after terrified residents. The roads were strewn with abandoned cars, some apparently looted in the night. Smoke rose from downtown Chicago in at least 2 plumes, forming columns that smeared the sky. Occasionally, we'd spot a helicopter flying overhead, too high to make out the details, but the chop-chop-chop noise seemed tense, purposeful. Mei Lin and I agreed we needed more supplies if we were going to stay in that apartment. We spent a few hours scouring Dustin's place for anything useful. Found a box of .45 ammo, useless for the Glock but possibly trade-worthy if we met others. Some random tools in a closet, a hammer, a multi-purpose knife, duct tape. Enough cleaning supplies to create a makeshift disinfectant, though we weren't sure how effective it'd be against whatever was causing this outbreak. By noon, the local power started flickering. We discovered that the building's front door was ajar. Either someone had come in or left without locking up. We found no one in the hall, but we did hear noises from one of the ground floor apartments, shifting furniture, a muffled voice. Not wanting to risk it, we retreated upstairs to plan. If we barricaded ourselves completely, we risked isolation if the building caught fire, or if more infected got inside. If we left, we stepped back into the unknown. Neither option felt particularly good. Over the next day or two, reality set in. We were in survival mode. I kept thinking about that police station and how the outbreak arrived so suddenly, so violently. Scenes of the bodies on the floor, the shattered glass, the sprinting infected in the lobby. These thoughts haunted me. Sometimes at night, the city's silence would break with a fresh chorus of panicked screams, or a volley of gunfire, or the roar of an explosion in the distance. I'd wake up with a jolt, always scanning the door, expecting something to burst through. Mei Lin became withdrawn, rarely speaking except in hushed tones. Her eyes stayed locked on the horizon outside the window, as though waiting for an army of infected to come charging down the street. On the 3rd day after we arrived in Brookfield, we ventured out to scavenge. Our plan was simple. search a few nearby stores for canned goods and water, maybe see if any pharmacy remained unraided. We left the cruiser behind, figuring it drew too much attention. Instead, we moved on foot, hugging walls, staying alert for movement. The neighborhood looked like it had been through a war. Doors to houses hung off their hinges, windows blown out, small fires left to smolder in trash cans. In the distance, a group of infected prowled the main road, chasing someone I couldn't see. We stuck to side streets until we reached a small strip mall with a pharmacy, a sandwich shop, and a convenience store. The sandwich shop had been ransacked, shattered glass, smeared counters. The convenience store wasn't much better, but we found a few cans of fruit and a couple bottles of water overlooked in the chaos. It wasn't a lot, but it would keep us going. Mei Lin found a first aid kit in the employee restroom. The pharmacy was a different story. The entrance was locked tight, maybe by someone who used stronger methods to barricade it. I spent a couple of minutes with my pick set, sweating as I fumbled with the pins. Finally, the lock gave. We eased the door open. The place was dimly lit by a skylight overhead, the shelves mostly stripped. But a few items remained. Bandages, over-the-counter pain relievers, some antibiotics behind the counter. That's when we heard a soft shuffle from behind the pharmacy door that led to the back room. We froze. My grip tightened on the Glock. For a moment we stood there, listening intently. Another soft sound, like someone shifting their feet on the tile floor. I motioned for Mei Lin to stay back. As I inched forward, I nudged the door open with the muzzle of the gun. A figure stood there, wearing a torn lab coat. Pale skin, eyes glazed over, with blood dribbling from a deep gash across one arm. It turned sharply, sensing me. In an instant, it rushed forward with alarming speed, arms flailing. I fired twice, but it kept coming, slamming into the door so hard that the wood cracked. The door battered my wrist, and I stumbled back, nearly losing my footing. Mei Lin lunged, swinging the baton. It struck the figure's torso, but it barely seemed to register. I lined up another shot, trying not to hit Mei Lin. This time, the bullet took the infected down, leaving it sprawled across the threshold. The entire pharmacy echoed with the blast, and for a moment, the only sound was the rattling of glass jars on the shelves. Fear churned in my mind, but I forced that aside and took a step forward to confirm the figure wasn't getting back up. It lay still. We quickly gathered what we could from the back room, small boxes of antibiotics, bandages, disinfectant. Then we dashed out, hearts hammering in a silence we didn't want to break with words. Outside, the afternoon sun glared off the broken glass. A few infected roamed near the main road, too far to notice us. We took a side street and retreated to Dustin's apartment. That night, we spoke in hushed voices about the future. Did we plan to stay holed up indefinitely? How long would supplies last? Was there some government safe zone we could realistically reach? Every plan seemed fraught with risks. Meanwhile, the city beyond the walls spiraled further into disarray. We glimpsed columns of smoke rising from newly ignited fires, heard scattered gunshots echo through the streets. Occasionally, the thunderous roar of a jet plane cut across the sky, presumably part of the National Guard's efforts. Despite the danger, every time we tried to sleep, a wave of recollections swept over me. The police station's corridors smeared with deep red, the startled expressions on officers who never expected their own headquarters to become a battlefield. The everyday folks in that station's lobby, likely there for minor issues or to bail out a friend, now lying in contorted forms on the tiles. And me, ironically, a criminal who had just escaped captivity because the world outside fell apart even faster than my own life had. After about a week in Brookfield, we realized we couldn't stay. The apartments around us were showing signs of infiltration. We heard door after door being knocked in, the screams of neighbors who'd held out until the infected found them. Fearful that we'd be next, we made a plan to leave at dawn. We decided to head west toward the less populated areas. Maybe farmland or a smaller town would be easier to defend. The old police cruiser was still sitting where I left it, but the windows were smashed, the tires slashed. No chance of salvaging that. So we traveled on foot, keeping to the back roads. We each carried a pack of supplies. I kept the Glock holstered at my side now. Mei Lin had a few knives strapped to her belt, along with the baton. Our plan was to find any functional vehicle along the way, preferably something sturdy, like a pickup or an SUV. Over the next 2 days, we trudged through the suburbs. We heard rumors from scattered survivors. Some pockets of National Guard had set up blockades near the major highways, turning people away to avoid mass spread of infection. A few folks claimed that certain neighborhoods had banded together to fortify big box stores or community centers. Others whispered about roaming gangs who took advantage of the chaos to raid and pillage. We never stayed in one place long enough to confirm these stories. We always kept moving. Yet, every so often, I flashed back to the moment this all began for me, handcuffed in that interrogation room, hearing the muffled panic in the hallway. The irony wasn't lost on me. If I hadn't been caught that night, I might have ended up on the streets at ground zero of the outbreak, or cornered somewhere without any protection at all. In a twisted way, that arrest saved my life. On our third day traveling west, we stumbled upon a deserted auto shop near La Grange. The place had obviously been looted, but a battered pickup truck rested in the lot, driver's door wide open, keys dangling from the ignition. The front bumper was dented, but the tires looked okay. I slid behind the wheel, said a quiet thanks to whoever left it there, and tried the engine. It sputtered to life on the second try. Our relief was palpable. We filled the gas tank from a couple of half-full cans we found in the shop's supply shed. Then, carefully checking the road for infected, we rolled out. From there we followed back roads, using an old map we'd snagged in the pharmacy to avoid major routes. Sometimes we had to backtrack when roads became blocked by abandoned vehicles or National Guard barricades. At one such barricade, near a small intersection, we saw a cluster of uniformed soldiers lying motionless. The Humvee they'd driven was smashed against a lamppost. No signs of life, or unlife for that matter. It was simply one more dreadful scene in a world gone mad. We pressed on until we reached a remote stretch of farmland. The fields extended on either side, tall grasses swaying under a cloudy sky. We spotted a small farmhouse in the distance and decided to investigate. Drawing closer, we noticed the barn door was ajar, broken. A windmill turned lazily, creaking with each rotation. The house itself looked intact, no smashed windows or doors. We pulled into the long dirt driveway, the truck's tires crunching over gravel. Before stepping out, we scanned for any movement. No immediate signs of infected. The front porch boards groaned under my boots. I knocked softly on the door, and when there was no response, I turned the knob. Inside, the house smelled stale, but it looked untouched. Dust motes drifted through the beams of sunlight crossing the living room. Furniture sat in neat arrangement, as if waiting for the family who once lived there to return. We did a quick sweep of the rooms. Nobody. The kitchen had a few canned goods left, some water in plastic jugs. Most of the perishables had rotted, but we found a sealed jar of pickles, a jar of peanut butter. In a back bedroom, there was a small gun cabinet, locked. I picked it open. Inside was an old hunting rifle, a Remington Model 700, along with a few boxes of ammo. Not much, but better than nothing. I slung it over my shoulder, feeling strangely grateful for the chance to arm myself more effectively. That evening, we decided this farmhouse could be a temporary haven. We barricaded the doors with furniture, leaving one exit partially open for emergencies. We hauled some supplies from the truck inside and lit a few candles in case the power went out. The generator in the barn was empty, so we made a mental note to look for fuel if we stayed here long. Days stretched into a week, then more. We survived by scavenging nearby farms, sometimes driving as far as the next town to see if any stores remained untouched. We encountered infected sporadically, usually lone figures or small groups wandering the countryside. They still moved quickly whenever they spotted us, but out here in the open, we had a better chance of seeing them from a distance. The rifle proved invaluable for picking them off before they got too close. Despite everything, I couldn't shake the memories of that police station. I kept wondering if there were any officers who made it out, like Detective Church, who seemed so composed, or that young officer who poked his head in during my interrogation. In the back of my mind, I wanted to believe they found a way to survive. I thought about the other detainees too. Some of them had probably been mid-interrogation or waiting for bail. Did they remain locked in their cells, waiting as the infected tore through the station corridors? The thought made me shudder, thinking back to that row of cell doors I'd passed. Mei Lin noticed my preoccupation one evening as we sat on the farmhouse porch, keeping an eye on the horizon. The sun was sinking behind the fields, painting the sky in muted orange. "You keep drifting off," she said quietly. "Something on your mind?" I shrugged, just thinking about how all this started for me. "The station?" "Yeah. I was handcuffed at the time," I admitted with a dry laugh. "If I hadn't had that pic hidden, or if the cops had done a better search, I might still be in there when it all blew up." Mei Lin nodded, fiddling with the baton she kept on her lap. "It's strange, isn't it? How everything that used to matter, jobs, crimes, money, feels so unimportant now. We're all just trying to survive." "You got that right," I murmured. A companionable silence followed. The wind rustled the tall grass. Something scurried near the barn, but it was probably just a stray cat or raccoon. These quiet moments felt fragile, like they could be ripped away at any second by the infected or by some roving band of looters. Fear lurked just beyond the flicker of candlelight we used after dark. We didn't stay at the farmhouse forever. Word reached us through traveling survivors that the National Guard was organizing a bigger perimeter in Indiana, near Gary, aiming to carve out a safe zone. The rumors were contradictory. Some said the perimeter was holding, others claimed it was already overrun. But if there was even a chance of finding a larger group of survivors, with some semblance of security, we had to consider it. Over the weeks, we'd grown adept at traveling lightly, keeping watch through the night, and using signals to communicate if we got separated. Mei Lin fashioned a basic alarm system around the farmhouse with fishing lines and tin cans. A small trick learned from her father, who used to go camping with her. I became more comfortable with the Remington, practicing quick shots at makeshift targets in the field. Our daily routine was about vigilance, gathering food, and ensuring the infected stayed far away. Eventually, we decided to head out. One crisp morning, we loaded the pickup with supplies, carefully double-checking the rifle, the Glock, and our backup ammo. I made sure to top off the gas tank from a small reserve we'd siphoned from a neighbor's tractor. Before driving away, Mei Lin and I stood on the porch one last time, scanning the empty fields. The memories of quiet nights here felt strange in a world otherwise filled with chaos. Then I started the engine, and we left the farmhouse behind, uncertain if we would ever return. Our journey took us farther from Chicago. On the horizon, we could still see the faint smudge of smoke that hung over the city. The suburbs gave way to more open spaces. Sometimes we passed caravans of other survivors, but we all kept our distance. Nobody trusted anyone without reason. At times we heard gunshots in the distance, or the roar of trucks speeding by on parallel roads. We drove mostly in silence, hearts heavy with the knowledge that the infection had spread well beyond the city limits. We never got near Gary. A group of refugees we encountered insisted that the safe zone there had collapsed when a fresh wave of infected broke through the perimeter. They suggested heading north, maybe toward Wisconsin or west into Iowa. No one knew for sure if any place was genuinely free of the outbreak. Still, we pressed on. My instincts, honed from years of skirting the law, kept us aware of potential threats. We used deserted highways, cutting across farmland when roads got blocked. Our days became a cycle of traveling, scavenging, resting only when we felt secure. When supplies ran low, I'd slip into abandoned stores, garages, or farmhouses, picking locks or forcing doors as needed. My criminal past, ironically, had become an asset in a world where closed doors could mean the difference between life and death. Along the way, we encountered a few more infected. The speed and viciousness never failed to rattle me. They'd come tearing across empty lots or out of a shadowy alley, teeth bared. But after so many close calls, Mei Lin and I had learned to respond quickly and quietly. A well-timed shot, a decisive swing of the baton, and then we'd move on before more arrived. We occasionally found survivors who were injured or on the brink of giving in to despair. Sometimes we offered spare water or a can of soup, but we never lingered long. In this new reality, trusting strangers was a luxury we couldn't afford, unless you were certain they wouldn't turn on you for a few supplies. And yet, the memory of that station remained the pivot point in my story. Every time I locked a door behind me or raised a gun in defense, I remembered how it felt to see those first infected burst through the precinct lobby. I remembered picking the handcuffs, stepping out of that interrogation room, and stumbling into what felt like a nightmare come to life. Sometimes at night, I'd think about those criminals in the holding cells, the officers who might have tried to help them. I'd wonder how many people found themselves trapped, how many had the means to fight back. Maybe I had a twisted sense of gratitude toward my old life of crime, for giving me the skills to survive, the street smarts, the dexterity, the resourcefulness. These all kept me alive when the world flipped upside down. But it was also more than that. Witnessing the downfall of that police station changed me. The eyes of the infected officer who lunged at me in the lobby, the pinned name tag shining under the flickering light. Those details still lingered. I saw how fragile order and authority truly were. When a crisis this big swept in, even the best trained institutions crumbled. As weeks turned into months, Mei Lin and I drifted across multiple counties. We formed loose alliances with pockets of survivors here and there, trading resources, exchanging information. We stayed with one group for a short while, helping them fortify a community center in a small town. But inevitably, tensions rose over resource distribution or differences in leadership, and we moved on. During a supply run in a quiet village, we met an off-duty nurse, Todd, who'd been traveling with his sister. Todd had managed to keep medical supplies from his old clinic. He patched up a cut on Mei Lin's leg when she tripped over some debris. In return, I taught him how to hotwire a car when keys weren't available. It felt surreal, bartering medical skills for lockpicking tips, but that was the new normal. We never stayed put for too long. Infected hordes would pass through, or resource caches would run dry. We became, in a sense, wandering survivors, always scanning the horizon for either hope or danger. And in each abandoned town, each deserted highway, each fleeting alliance, I carried the memory of that fateful night in the police station. It was a reminder of how quickly society collapsed, and how I, of all people, walked out alive. Sometimes I reflect on the strangeness of it all, a life of petty theft leading up to the biggest heist of my career, only to get nabbed in the act and dragged to a police station. Then, in a bizarre twist of fate, I was freed by the very apocalypse that ended so many others. My criminal background, once my biggest liability, became a lifeline in a world without law, and the guilt of what I'd done in the past, stealing, hurting people through my actions, mingled with a newfound sense of responsibility, because now the world required me to do whatever it took to stay alive. Crime or not, right or wrong, I had to use all my cunning just to wake up another day. If someone asked me to tell them how I survived the outbreak at the station, really survived, it wouldn't be a short answer. It would involve quiet moments and frantic ones, a tapestry of images that never stop replaying in my mind. I'd start by saying, don't ever underestimate how quickly the world can unravel. Then, I'd talk about how the halls of that police station morphed into a battleground, how the screech of infected overcame the hum of fluorescent lights, how the glass doors shattered, letting in the nightmarish reality that swallowed Chicago whole. I'd tell them about the shaky trigger pulls, how each shot echoed with finality, how I stepped over fallen officers, Men and women who never expected their own station to be ground zero for carnage. I'd recount the stale smell of the interrogation room, the coldness of handcuffs on my wrists, and how that single overlooked pick became my key to freedom. Maybe I'd even mention the irony that my plan to rob a jewelry store ended up saving my life. There's no moral lesson neatly packaged here, it's just how things unfolded. Sometimes, luck is all that stands between you and an ending that arrives too soon. Fast forward to now, and I've lost track of the months since the outbreak started. The seasons are changing, the air has grown cooler, leaves turning golden and red before scattering across abandoned roads. Mei Lin and I are traveling north, having heard whispers of a settlement near the Wisconsin border that's supposedly well fortified. We cling to the hope that somewhere out there, people are finding a way to rebuild, to reclaim a semblance of normalcy. Every once in a while, I pass a newspaper stand or an old bus stop ad with headlines that now seem laughably out of date. Sports scores, local festivals, election campaign slogans. They remind me of a world that probably won't return, at least not in my lifetime. Yet, I keep going, putting one foot in front of the other, or 1 mile of road behind another, because despite everything, I'm still breathing, still making choices, still pushing forward. That's my story. It's not pretty or heroic. It's certainly not the life I expected when I walked into Seraphine Diamonds that night. But it's real. At least as real as anything can be when you've seen things that defy logic. Neighbors turning on neighbors, entire institutions collapsing overnight, and infected creatures that sprint faster than any living person should. If you're hearing this, I guess that means I found a way to write it down or speak it aloud without getting torn apart. Maybe I made it to a place where folks gather around a campfire at dusk, sharing accounts of the outbreak like cautionary tales. Sometimes I think about that sign the Chicago PD used to have in its lobby, something about serving and protecting the community. Those words still echo in my mind whenever I recall the station's final hours. The men and women in uniform tried to uphold that motto until the bitter end. In the end, though, the city was bigger than them, and the outbreak was bigger than us all. And me? I was just an opportunist who learned to survive by breaking a few laws, only to outlive the very system that once tried to lock me away. So if there's a moral in all of this, it's that survival can come from the most unexpected angles. The hardest part is retaining a shred of humanity along the way. In a twisted sense, I learned that from a bunch of cops who never got the chance to read me my rights properly. They showed me that sometimes order can break, but empathy doesn't have to. I saw officers trying to save civilians, even as the station fell apart. I saw detainees helping each other escape when the infected stormed the corridors. People who might have been on opposite sides of the law joined forces against a threat far more terrifying than any petty criminal. That's the image I hold close when nightmares edge in. A moment when the line between officer and suspect blurred, replaced by a singular focus on making it out alive. That's how I'd like to think it went down anyway. Because in the end, that's what it took for me to push open those station doors and face the night. And that's what it takes every single day now. Pushing open doors that might lead to salvation or doom. Never really sure which side you'll end up on until you step through. I guess you could say my life as a criminal prepared me for an existence on the fringe. But this fringe, this post-outbreak world, is a different beast entirely. Maybe one day it'll get better. Maybe we'll find a vaccine, or the infected will burn themselves out. Maybe settlements will become towns again, and towns will become cities. Maybe the memory of that night in the police station will fade. But deep down, I suspect I'll carry it with me wherever I go, because that was the night everything changed forever. That was the night I transformed from a low-life thief into someone who would do anything to survive. So if you ever come across a broken-down farm with furniture stacked against the doors, or a deserted precinct with bullet casings in the lobby, or an abandoned cruiser on a side street with smashed windows, maybe that was us, or maybe that was someone else fighting their own fight. Either way, tread carefully. The infected are still out there, sprinting through the shadows, always hungry. And trust me, you do not want to end up inside any building, police station or otherwise, when they come crashing through. Take it from a guy who learned the hard way. If there's a single piece of advice I can offer, it's this. When you hear the screams, when you see the chaos, move. Don't freeze. Don't look back. Run or fight if you must, but don't just stand there. Because in this new reality, hesitation can be a fate worse than any cell you might have ended up in. I know, because I've seen both sides. The inside of a jail and the inside of an outbreak, and I can't tell you which is more terrifying. At least in a cell, you know the walls will hold. Out here, there's no guarantee of anything, except that if you do nothing, you'll become just another piece of the debris left in the wake of a disaster nobody fully comprehends. Yes, I'm a criminal by trade, but I'm also a survivor, and that's the part of my identity that matters now. So stay sharp, watch your back, and for your own sake, if you find yourself in Chicago or anywhere else with those fast and furious infected prowling the streets, don't seek refuge in a precinct just because it used to be safe. Believe me, there's no guarantee those walls will protect you. I learned that lesson the second I stepped into the hallway and saw the bloodstains under the flickering fluorescent lights. The last thing you want to do is walk into a trap. And trust me, for all the steel bars and bulletproof glass, a police station can still become a tomb. If you see the door open, if the lobby looks quiet, don't take the bait. Do not go inside the police station. Zombies already here. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling creepypastas. Your support keeps my channel alive. Until next time, stay quiet, stay vigilant, and trust nothing, not even the silence.